200 years ago tonight, in 1814, a captive on a British warship watched a fleet bombard Fort McHenry in Baltimore. When it ended, Francis Scott Key saw the American flag still waving over the fort, inspiring the poem that's now our national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. What So Proudly We Hailed is the new book that looks at the cloudy backstory of the anthem. Joining us is the author, historian Marc Leepson. Marc, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
His friends called him Frank.
That's
I love
correct.
that. He was in the kitchen cabinet of Andrew Jackson. He was a lawyer and, as you say, actually not a very good poet.
Sorry to say, he was not a good poet, except for the words that he wrote 200 years ago tonight and tomorrow morning. And words that hundreds of millions of Americans know. He wrote amateur poetry that was never meant to go beyond family and friends. And after he died, it was published in a book, so you can read it. You can go to Google Books and read it, so don't take my word for it. He wasn't that good of a poet, right?
So when you look at the four verses, which, like you said, most people don't even realize there's a third and a fourth verse. The first two, we sort of understand what's going on. It's very descriptive. What were the third and the fourth verse that people don't like to talk about?
Francis Scott Key was a very pious man, and he was a very patriotic man. So those words are filled with piety and patriotism. And there's also a line in the third verse, and you're right, we never sing it. We only sing that first verse, the one that ends in a question mark, by the way, which is sort of interesting for a national anthem. But he makes a reference to the hireling and the slave in the third verse. That's a reference to how the British encouraged enslaved Americans to come to their side during the War of 1812 to get their freedom, which thousands did.
He refers to the foul footsteps of the slaves. And actually, I mean, part of the cloudiness of his whole background is there's some questions about his attitude towards race, and some people even say he had a big role in sparking a race riot, correct?
That's correct. The first race riot in the nation's capital, called the Snow Riot in 1835, he was U.S. Attorney for Washington, and he prosecuted an abolitionist for possessing abolitionist tracts. And there was also something else going on. But, look, Francis Scott Key was a player in the early republic. He was an important person in Washington. Like you said, he was a member of Andrew Jackson's kitchen cabinet, U.S. Attorney for Washington. Slavery is an issue you can't get away from in the early republic. So anyone who's influential there is going to have a say-so, and Key did.
There were two previous biographies about him before yours. What to you stood out the most in your research that people don't know about him?
I think the fact that, he was only 35 years old when he wrote the Star Spangled Banner. That was 1814. He died in 1843, and he had a prominent role. He never was a senator or a congressman. He didn't like politics. But he was he argued over 100 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court, some really interesting cases and important cases. And I think the surprising thing to me was how important a personage he was in the early republic.
Absolutely fascinating. Marc Leepson, thanks so much for being with us. The book is What So Proudly We Hailed. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure.